The ground shook first, long before anyone saw what was coming. Dust rose from the hills outside Thessaly, and birds scattered into a sky that had gone the color of rust. The people of the colony had felt tremors before, small ones from mining work near the ridge. This was not that. This shook the windows and rattled the pipes under the streets, and everyone who felt it knew exactly what it meant. The Jurassic Empire had come back. Sirens began across the colony, calling every soldier to the walls. Daniel Ward was already moving before the second alarm sounded. He was not a soldier. He carried no rifle, no blade, nothing but a medical pack strapped across his chest and steady hands that had learned, through 2 years on this world, not to shake even when the sky was falling. He ran toward the eastern trench line, where the defense force was gathering, because that was where the wounded would be. The Jurassic assault came over the ridge in a wall of smoke and fire. Armored vehicles rolled first, but nothing on the field compared to what walked behind them. It was massive, taller than any building in the colony, covered in dark plates that caught the light like wet stone. Its long neck swept from side to side as it moved, and every step it took cracked the ground beneath it. Soldiers who had faced the Empire before knew its name only in whispers. A war dragon, bred in Jurassic labs, trained through pain until fear was the only language it understood, and sent into battle as a living weapon that no ordinary force could stop. Colonel Reyes stood at the command post, watching through a scope as the creature tore through the first line of defense. Tanks folded under its claws. A bunker collapsed when its tail struck the corner. The soldiers called it Skull, a name taken from an old Jurassic transmission the Empire had never bothered to hide. Reyes gave the order to fall back to the second trench and bring up the heavy guns, the ones built specifically for moments like this, moments the colony had trained for but never truly believed would come. Daniel worked through the chaos, dragging wounded soldiers behind cover, pressing bandages into wounds, shouting instructions to anyone still able to listen. He did not look up when the dragon roared. He could not afford to. A soldier missing part of his leg needed a tourniquet more than Daniel needed to watch the sky. The battle turned an hour later, when the heavy guns finally found their range. 3 shells struck Skull's shoulder in quick succession, and for the first time since the attack began, the great creature staggered. A 4th shell tore into its side, and it went down hard, crushing a section of fence beneath its weight. The Jurassic advance stalled. Asen, the warlord commanding the assault from the rear, watched the feed from his command vehicle and gave a single order through gritted teeth. Pull back. Leave it. His handlers hesitated only a moment before obeying. To the Jurassic Empire, a wounded war dragon was not a soldier to be rescued. It was a broken machine, expensive to repair and easier to replace. As the rest of the invasion force retreated over the ridge under covering fire, Skull was left behind in the crater his own fall had made, chained by nothing but his wounds, surrounded by an enemy that had every reason to finish what the shells had started. When the smoke cleared enough to see, Reyes ordered the perimeter held but told his soldiers to stay back from the fallen dragon. Nobody argued. The creature was still enormous, even lying down, its breathing ragged, one wing torn nearly free at the joint, blood the color of dark oil pooling beneath it. Every soldier who looked at it saw only the thing that had crushed a bunker an hour earlier. Nobody saw anything worth saving. Daniel saw it differently. He had spent the last hour keeping people alive who had been broken by machines and shells, and something in him did not know how to stop just because the next patient was not human. He told himself it was only instinct, the same instinct that made him run toward danger instead of away from it. He walked past the perimeter line before anyone could stop him, medical packs still slung across his shoulder, and nobody called him back in time. Skull's head turned as Daniel approached, one enormous eye tracking him through a haze of pain. A low sound rumbled from deep in the creature's chest, not quite a growl, more a warning that said stay away without needing words. Daniel stopped 10 feet away and did not raise his hands, did not reach for a weapon he did not carry. He simply stood there, letting the dragon look at him, letting it decide. Behind him, someone shouted his name. Sergeant Holt, running up the trench line with 2 other soldiers, weapons raised toward the fallen dragon. Daniel turned and put himself between the guns and the wounded creature without thinking about what that meant. Stand down, he said. It hasn't moved. It's not attacking anyone. It's a war machine, Holt snapped. It kills people for a living. So do we? Sometimes, Daniel answered. Doesn't mean it needs to die tonight. Nobody fired. Reyes, watching from a distance, gave the order to hold, more out of curiosity than mercy. The sun began to set over the ridge, painting the crater in orange light, and Daniel Ward stood alone beside the most feared creature in the sector, closer to it than any human had ever stood without dying for the mistake. Skull did not move against him. He simply watched, breathing hard, blood pooling slowly beneath torn scales, as the only person left on the battlefield who had not run from him knelt down and opened his medical pack. Word of what Daniel had done spread through the colony faster than the smoke could clear from the battlefield. By the time he walked back through the gates that night, exhausted and covered in dust and dragon blood, half the garrison already knew. Some called him brave. Most called him a fool. Colonel Reyes called him into the command tent before he had even washed his hands. You knelt down next to a war dragon, Reyes said, not quite believing his own words as he spoke them. Unarmed. Within striking distance. Do you understand what that thing did to my bunker 3 hours ago? I understand it could have killed me and didn't, Daniel said. That has to mean something. It means it was too weak to move, Reyes said. Not that it decided to spare you. Daniel did not have a good answer for that. Not yet. So he said nothing. Reyes studied him for a long moment, then rubbed a hand over his tired face and said what Daniel already expected to hear. The creature stays chained where it fell. Nobody goes near it except under armed guard, and if it so much as twitches wrong, it gets put down. That includes you. Am I clear? Daniel nodded, though something in his chest did not agree with the order. That night he lay awake in his bunk, thinking about the way the dragon's eye had followed him, not with hunger, not with rage, but with something closer to caution. An animal that size, trained for war its entire life, had every reason to snap his neck the moment he came close. It hadn't. That fact sat in Daniel's mind like a splinter he could not stop touching. He went back the next morning anyway, before the guards had finished their shift change, carrying a fresh pack of supplies he had quietly gathered overnight. The soldiers on watch tried to stop him, but Daniel simply reminded them that Reyes had not actually forbidden treating the wounds, only forbidden going near without a reason. It was a thin excuse, and everyone knew it, but nobody wanted to be the one who shot the colony's own medic over a technicality, so they let him pass. Skull was awake when Daniel approached, his massive head lifting slightly off the dirt, chains looped loosely around his front legs more for show than actual restraint, since nothing in the colony's arsenal could truly hold a creature his size if he chose to fight it. The low warning growl returned, quieter this time, more tired than threatening. Daniel crouched at a careful distance and spoke in a calm, even voice, the same voice he used on frightened patients who did not understand what was happening to them. I'm not here to hurt you, he said. I know you can't understand a word of that, but I figure the tone matters more than the words. He moved slowly, showing his hands, showing the pack, showing that nothing he carried was a weapon. It took nearly 20 minutes before he was close enough to reach the worst of the wounds along the dragon's side, where the shells had torn through scale and muscle. Skull's whole body tensed as Daniel's hands finally touched him, and for one long, terrifying second, Daniel thought this was the moment he had misjudged everything. Then the tension eased. Not fully, not trust, not yet, but enough that Daniel could work. He cleaned the wound as best he could with what supplies he had, packing it, wrapping what could be wrapped, doing for the dragon roughly what he would have done for any soldier with a wound too large for the colony's medical bay to properly close. Skull made small sounds through the process, low and pained, but he did not pull away, and he did not strike. When Daniel finally stepped back, hands shaking now that the work was done, the dragon watched him leave with the same steady eye he had used the night before. This became a routine over the following days. Daniel came in the early morning and again in the evening, always alone, always unarmed, always speaking in that same calm voice whether or not the words meant anything to the creature listening. He learned the dragon's habits, the way Skull's tail would twitch when he was in pain, the way his breathing changed when he was simply resting. He learned to read the low sounds in his chest, some clearly warnings, others closer to something Daniel almost wanted to call relief. Sergeant Holt watched from the perimeter most mornings, arms crossed, saying nothing, though his expression made his opinion clear enough. Reyes let it continue only because the dragon had not attacked anyone, and because, strangely, Skull's wounds were healing faster than any of the garrison's doctors had expected. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone understood that whatever Daniel was doing, it was working. By the end of the first week, something had shifted that nobody could quite explain. Skull began lifting his head when Daniel approached from a distance, before the guards even announced him. On the seventh morning, as Daniel knelt to check the healing wound along the dragon's side, Skull lowered his massive head until it rested gently on the dirt beside him, close enough that Daniel could feel the warm breath moving in slow, steady waves. It was not affection, not exactly, but it was not fear either. It was something new, something the colony's records on war dragons had never once described, and something the Jurassic Empire had spent generations of breeding and conditioning trying to make sure never happened at all. Rumors moved through a colony the way fire moves through dry grass, and by the second week, everyone on Thessaly had heard some version of the story. The medic was taming the enemy's dragon. Some versions said Daniel could already ride the thing. Others said the dragon spoke to him at night in a language only Daniel understood. None of it was true, but the core of it, that a bond of some kind had formed between the two, was impossible to deny by anyone who had actually seen them together. Sergeant Holt did not like it, and he was not quiet about saying so. He gathered a handful of soldiers who agreed with him, men and women who had lost friends to war dragons on other worlds, who saw nothing but a weapon lying in a crater waiting for the day it decided to remember what it was bred for. On the 10th morning, while Daniel was away collecting fresh supplies from the medical bay, Holt led 3 soldiers past the perimeter to fit Skull with heavier restraints, chains meant to actually hold him rather than simply mark a boundary he had chosen to respect. It went wrong immediately. Skull had allowed Daniel close because Daniel moved slowly, spoke softly, and never once reached for him with anything but care. Holt's team moved fast, weapons raised, chains in hand, shouting orders at a creature that understood none of their language and had spent every day of his existence learning that armed strangers approaching quickly meant pain. Skull reared back before the first chain even touched him, and in the panic that followed, one soldier was thrown clear across the crater with a broken arm, and another was pinned beneath a foreleg hard enough to crack 2 ribs before Skull released him and retreated to the far edge of the crater, chest heaving, tail lashing against the dirt in warning. Daniel arrived in time to see the aftermath, soldiers being carried away, Holt shouting that the dragon had proven exactly what everyone should have known from the start. Daniel did not argue with him in front of the others. He simply walked past the shouting and back toward the crater, and this time, when he called out in that same calm voice, Skull's head turned toward him instantly, the tension in his massive body easing the moment he recognized who was approaching. That evening, Reyes called an emergency meeting. Half the room wanted the dragon destroyed before it hurt someone permanently. The other half, quietly, without wanting to admit it out loud, had started to wonder whether Daniel had actually found something worth protecting. Reyes settled the argument the only way he knew how, by stating a fact nobody in the room could dispute. The creature let 2 soldiers approach it with weapons and chains, and still chose only to defend itself, not to kill. It had every opportunity to kill both of them and chose not to. That is not the behavior of a mindless weapon. It is the behavior of something that trusts exactly one person, Daniel said, and none of us are him. Then it stays your responsibility, Reyes said finally. Nobody goes near him but you. If he becomes a danger to this colony, that responsibility falls on you as well. Understood? Daniel understood. He spent the following days rebuilding what Holt's mistake had damaged, sitting with Skull for hours at a time, letting the dragon settle back into the quiet routine that had made him feel safe in the first place. It worked, slowly, though something in Skull's manner had changed. He watched the perimeter more carefully now, more alert to movement at the edges of the crater, as if the attempted restraint had reminded him that safety was not something the world outside Daniel's presence could be trusted to offer. Far beyond Thessaly, in a Jurassic command vessel still recovering from the failed assault, Warlord Asen received a report that troubled him more than the loss of the invasion itself. Scouts confirmed that the dragon-designated Skull had survived his wounds and was being kept alive by the humans, apparently without chains, without conditioning collars, without any of the tools the Empire relied on to keep its war dragons obedient. Asen read the report twice before setting it down. A war dragon that learns to trust without fear is no longer a war dragon, he said to his second in command. It is a liability. Every dragon in the breeding program exists because it believes pain is the only certainty in its life. If word spreads that a human tamed one through kindness alone, the entire program becomes worthless. Every handler on every world will suddenly need to ask whether their own creatures might be capable of choosing something other than obedience. His second suggested sending a retrieval team to quietly eliminate the dragon before the story could spread further. Asen considered it, then shook his head slowly. A quiet mission risked failure and further embarrassment. No, he said. We finish what the invasion started. We return to Thessaly in greater force, reclaim what belongs to the Empire, and make certain no human colony ever believes again that one of our dragons can be turned. Whatever bond has formed there will be broken, one way or another, and the galaxy will see that fear, not kindness, is what built the Jurassic Empire, and fear is what will remind it who it belongs to. 3 weeks passed before the first warning came, carried by a long-range scout ship that limped back into Thessaly's orbit with its sensors screaming. The Jurassic Empire was returning, and this time it was not sending a single dragon backed by ground troops. Asen had gathered a fleet, several war dragons among the ranks, and enough soldiers to make certain there would be no repeat of the failure that had left one of his creatures behind in a human colony's crater. Reyes called every able body to the walls the moment the report came through, and for the first time since the earlier battle, Daniel found himself standing at the perimeter of the crater not to treat wounds, but to look at Skull and wonder what role, if any, the dragon would play in what was coming. Skull had healed well over the past month. His wing had knitted back together, stronger even than before according to the colony's few veterinary specialists, and the wound along his side had closed into a long, pale scar. He could stand fully now, could move without the limp that had marked his first days in the crater. He was, in every physical sense, ready for war again. The question nobody wanted to ask out loud was which side he would fight for. Reyes gathered his officers and laid out the numbers, and the numbers were bad. The Jurassic fleet outmatched Thessaly's defenses by a wide margin, and with multiple war dragons in their ranks, the colony's ground forces would be overwhelmed within hours unless something changed the balance. Sergeant Holt, still healing from his cracked ribs, was the one who finally said what everyone had been avoiding. If the dragon fights with us, we might survive this. If he doesn't, or if he turns on us the moment his own kind arrives, we lose everything, including the very reason we kept him alive in the first place. Daniel did not have a clean answer. He had spent a month building trust with a creature that could not speak, could not confirm loyalty in any language humans understood, and had no way of knowing for certain what would happen when Skull came face to face with the world he had been bred into. All Daniel had was a month of quiet mornings, of a massive head resting gently against the dirt beside him, of an animal that had chosen, again and again, not to hurt him when every instinct in its training said it should. That has to count for something, Daniel said finally. I've never once seen him choose violence when he had a peaceful option available. Not with me. I have to believe that means something when it matters most. Reyes did not look convinced, but he was out of better options. He gave the order to prepare defenses as best they could and left the matter of the dragon in Daniel's hands, the same way he had a month earlier. Only now the stakes were the survival of the entire colony rather than one soldier's judgment call. The Jurassic scout ships arrived first, skimming low over the ridge to gather final intelligence before the main assault. What they reported back to Asen's flagship spread through the fleet faster than any official communication could have managed. The dragon-designated Skull had been sighted standing near the human perimeter, not chained, not caged, standing freely beside a single unarmed human, watching the approaching fleet with the same alert readiness he had once shown only for his handlers before a battle. Among the Jurassic soldiers, a quiet unease began to spread. War dragons were bred to be feared, not understood, and every soldier in the fleet had grown up hearing stories of what happened to anyone who crossed one without proper authorization. Now they were being asked to fight one, possibly the single most decorated dragon in the eastern sector, and nobody in the ranks had any experience facing a creature of that size and power as an enemy rather than a weapon fighting on their side. Asen tried to steady his forces with a simple reminder broadcast across the fleet. The dragon is conditioned. Whatever the humans believe they have done, a lifetime of training cannot be undone in a single month. When the proper signals are given, it will remember exactly what it is and who it answers to. Trust the process that built the Empire's power. Fear is patient. Fear always wins in the end. Not every soldier in the fleet found the reassurance convincing. Word had already spread of the two soldiers Skull had injured while defending himself against restraint, proof that whatever the humans had done, the dragon was no longer simply reacting to fear the way the conditioning demanded. As the fleet began its final approach toward Thessaly's atmosphere, more than one Drassic soldier found themselves glancing toward the growing shape of the colony below with something they rarely allowed themselves to feel before a battle: doubt. And beneath the doubt, quietly, the first flicker of a fear that had nothing to do with human weapons at all, and everything to do with a single dragon who might no longer belong to them. The sky over Thessaly turned dark with descending ships an hour before the ground assault began, and every soldier on the wall understood that this battle would decide far more than the last one had. Reyes walked the line one final time, checking positions, checking morale, saying little because there was little left to say. Daniel stood near the eastern perimeter, close to Skull, one hand resting against the dragon's foreleg while the other held nothing at all, since he still carried no weapon and had no intention of starting now. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than to a creature that could not understand the words. "But if you choose to stand with us, I need you to know none of this is a command. It's a choice. It has to be your choice, or it means nothing at all." Skull's head lowered until his eye was level with Daniel's, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Then the dragon straightened, turned to face the ridge where the Drassic ships were already beginning to unload their ground forces, and let out a sound that rolled across the entire colony, deep and enormous, a sound the soldiers on the wall had only ever heard used as a weapon of terror against them. This time it was aimed the other way. The Drassic assault hit the western wall first, armored units pushing hard against the colony's thinnest defenses. Reyes committed the heavy guns there immediately, and for a while the line held. Then the first war dragon under Drassic command came over the ridge, and the wall's defenses buckled under an attack the colony's weapons had never been designed to stop twice in one season. Skull moved before anyone gave an order. He crossed the distance to the western wall faster than anything his size should have been able to move, and when he met the Drassic dragon head-on, the ground itself seemed to shake with the impact. It was not a clean fight. Both creatures were built for exactly this kind of violence, and for several long minutes neither seemed to gain any real advantage. Claws and teeth and armored hide meeting again and again in a struggle that human weapons could do almost nothing to influence. Asen watched the engagement from his command vehicle, and when he saw Skull fighting against one of his own dragons, something like satisfaction crossed his face. He gave the order to activate the old conditioning signal, a specific frequency broadcast that had been used for years to recall dragons mid-battle, to remind them through carefully engineered pain response exactly which side commanded their obedience. The signal went out across the battlefield, and every Drassic soldier who had grown up trusting that signal's power watched Skull's ears flatten against his skull as it hit him. For one terrible second, it looked like it might work. Skull staggered, shook his massive head, and for a moment his attention seemed to drift toward the source of the signal rather than the enemy in front of him. Daniel, watching from the wall despite every order to stay under cover, ran forward without thinking, close enough now that the battle's edge could have killed him in an instant, and called out the only thing he had left to offer, not a command, just a name and a plea shouted into the chaos. Skull. It should not have mattered. A single human voice against years of engineered conditioning should not have been enough to change anything. But it was not really the sound that reached him. It was everything the sound represented: weeks of quiet mornings, of gentle hands on torn scales, of a stranger who had knelt beside him when every other choice available was to walk away or finish what the shells had started. Skull's head turned, found Daniel standing at the edge of the fighting, and something in the dragon's posture shifted entirely. The conditioning signal kept broadcasting. Skull ignored it completely, turned back to the enemy dragon, and finished the fight with a ferocity that had nothing left of hesitation in it. The Drassic dragon went down hard, and with it went the momentum of the entire Western assault. Soldiers who had been pushing forward moments earlier began to fall back, unnerved by watching one of the Empire's own weapons turn so completely against everything it had been built to serve. Reyes seized the opening immediately, committing the colony's remaining forces to a counterattack that drove the Jurassic line back toward the ridge faster than anyone had dared hope. Asen, watching his forces buckle, gave the order to withdraw before the loss became a total collapse. As the last of the Jurassic ships lifted off under covering fire, he stared at the battlefield below, at the massive shape of Skull standing beside a single unarmed human amid the wreckage of a battle the Empire had been certain to win. Whatever the Empire's breeding programs had built their power on, he understood in that moment, it had just been proven capable of failing, and there would be no easy way to explain that failure to anyone who asked how it happened. Smoke still hung over the western ridge the next morning when the colony began counting what the battle had cost them. It was less than anyone had feared the night before, far less than it would have been without the fight at the wall, and every soldier who had watched Skull turn the tide of that battle understood exactly why the numbers had not been worse. Reyes walked the perimeter at dawn, past the wreckage of Jurassic vehicles that had never made it past the outer defenses, and found Daniel exactly where he expected him to be, sitting near the crater that was no longer really a prison, checking the dragon's wounds from the fight the same way he had checked them a month earlier. He held against the recall signal, Reyes said, stopping a few feet away. I saw it happen. I still don't fully understand how. I don't think it was really about the signal, Daniel said, running a hand carefully along a fresh scrape on Skull's shoulder. I think it was about which voice he trusted more. That's not something the Empire ever gave him a reason to build. We did, by accident, just by treating him like something worth trusting in return. Reyes was quiet for a long moment, watching the dragon's steady breathing, the way his eye tracked Daniel's movements with none of the wariness that had marked their first days together. Finally, he said what the whole colony had likely already decided for him. He stays, not as a prisoner, not as a weapon we keep on a leash for the next attack. If he wants to stay, he stays as whatever he wants to be here, and that responsibility is still yours, though I suspect by now you'd have fought me on it if I said otherwise. Daniel allowed himself a tired smile, the first real one in weeks. I wasn't going to let you send him anywhere, he admitted. Not after everything he chose not to do to any of us, when he had every reason to. Word of the battle spread far beyond Thessaly in the weeks that followed, carried by trade ships and colonial reports until it reached ears on worlds that had never heard of the small frontier settlement before. The story changed shape as it traveled, as stories always do, but the core of it stayed the same everywhere it landed. A war dragon, bred by the Jurassic Empire and feared across a dozen conquered worlds, had been left for dead by his own masters, nursed back to health by an unarmed human who never once raised a hand against him, and had chosen, when given the choice between the fear that built him and the trust that saved him, to stand against the very empire that made him. For Warlord Asen, the consequences were immediate and difficult to contain. Word of a war dragon choosing loyalty over conditioning spread through the Empire's other breeding programs faster than any command could silence it. And for the first time in generations, handlers on distant worlds found themselves quietly wondering whether the creatures under their control were truly as unbreakable in their obedience as the Empire had always claimed. Asen spent months trying to explain the failure at Thessaly to his superiors, and no explanation he offered ever fully satisfied them, because the truth was simpler and more unsettling than anything he wanted to admit. Fear had built the Empire's power, and fear, it turned out, could be undone by something the Empire had never bothered to understand. On Thessaly, life slowly returned to something like normal, though the colony would never quite be the same place it had been before the day a wounded dragon fell into a crater at its border. Skull became a familiar sight along the perimeter, no longer chained, no longer guarded, simply present, the way a mountain is present, a quiet reminder of exactly what had been won and exactly what it had cost to win it. Children from the colony, once terrified of the very idea of him, grew bold enough over time to watch him from a careful distance, and eventually bold enough to wave, which Skull answered, more often than not, with a low sound that Daniel had come to recognize as something close to contentment. Sergeant Holt never fully warmed to the dragon, but he stopped arguing for his removal, and on the day Skoll placed himself between an incoming supply convoy and a rock slide that would have crushed it, Holt was the one who reported it to Reyes without a trace of his old resentment in his voice. Trust, it seemed, could grow in places even the most stubborn soldiers had once sworn it never would. Daniel still visited every morning, out of habit as much as duty, though the visits had long since stopped being about treating wounds. He simply sat beside the enormous creature who had once terrified an entire invading army, and who trusted, out of everyone in the galaxy who might have approached him with chains or weapons or fear, the one human who had chosen instead to approach with nothing but open hands and patience. It was not something the Jurassic Empire's breeding programs had ever accounted for, and it was not something the Empire would ever fully understand. But on the quiet frontier world of Thessaly, it had already changed everything, one gentle morning at a time.